I'm Jim Leitner. I'm the chair of the board of the Historical Society, and today's program is an annual program where we celebrate the county birthday. We're supported by tourism because it's obviously part of Carroll County history, and so we appreciate their help as well. We have a number of other programs, but this is the one that means most to us in some respects because, after all, we are the Historical Society of Carroll County, and what better than to celebrate the history of the county. Indeed, just last Tuesday, we heard about Charles Carroll of Carrollton. One of our board members, Jim Shriver, gave a talk, and so we've really been doing Carroll County this week. The background of it, the namesake, and now the birthday. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the annual birthday party for Carroll County. We're here to celebrate the formation of our county, which was formed in 1837. And I wasn't here then. I suspect none of you was here then either. It's more than 100 years later. Anyway, I want to thank the County Tourism Office, and Bonnie Stahl is back there. Bonnie, there she is. Thank you for your support for this event. Extend our thanks to Jack Ryburn, who is her boss in economic development, for stepping forward and being a sponsor for this event. We're also pleased to have a commissioner, Steve Wentz is back there, I think I saw. And there he is. Glad to have you here, Steve. And newly elected legislator Haven Shoemaker is also here. Haven, delightful to have you here as well. Nope, I did. Supposed to be one other one, but maybe we'll get it later. But anyway, we're pleased to have them here. We'd like to also, at this point, introduce, I guess for the first time publicly, our new executive director. Gator, come on up. Dr. Gator Davis. She's not officially on duty yet, but she promised that she'd be here today to get the official representation to the public. She's going to be on board on Tuesday. Yes. Dr. Davis is coming to us from Cleveland, where she was executive director of the Western Reserve Historical Society, but she's had other experiences in Vermont and in York, and she's bringing a wealth of experience and enthusiasm, particularly, I might add, to our job. So we're delighted to have you here.
Thank you.
Want to say anything to
Just that I'm looking forward to meeting the community on a very regular basis. So if you've got any ideas, please introduce yourself to me. I would love to meet you and know you. And also, if there are people you think I should be meeting, drop me a note or drop by at the Historical Society and tell me. And I'm looking forward to being part of your community this coming, I don't know, decade.
We hope. And she brought her husband with us too. He's back there, Greg Simpson. We're glad to have you here. He's still in Cleveland, but he made a special trip in just for this weekend, isn't it? Support, just great. Also want to thank our program committee for providing the refreshments, which we'll have after the speech. And it's organized, we'll hear her in just a minute, but it's organized by our chair, Marilyn Phillips, and Kathy Beatty is here representing the staff. And the two of them work very well together to produce this kind of event. I have to do one plug. If you are not a member of the Historical Society, you should be, because we put on these events, and there is membership material on the table back at the back there, and afterward there will be somebody there to sign you up and take your money. And also there are a number of other things there that are related to some of the events that are coming up in the near future. Some bus trips that we plan, we do 5 of those a year and so forth. So a lot of information back there, and I think Kathy will be back there to assist you with the mechanics. See a number of our board members here this afternoon too, and want to welcome you to be part of this event. Let's see, I guess we're going to turn it over to Marilyn now, who's going to introduce our speaker. So Marilyn, you're on. You don't have to read first reading from Samuel here. I'm going to put that over here. It's ready for tomorrow morning.
I can do that.
You can do that too. Okay, there you go.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out in the cold. Our speaker today is Mason-Dixon. He is a writer and historian whose research focuses on the Mid-Atlantic region and local history. His articles have appeared in Maryland Life, Chesapeake Life, and the Delmarva Quarterly, as well as newspapers and historical society journals. He has appeared on the Today Show, Maryland Public Television, and broadcast news programs, as well as National Geographic, Southern Living, and Chesapeake Life. As an adjunct professor, he teaches history courses at a number of area universities and colleges. Welcome, Michael.
Well, thank you so much. Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I'm just looking to see if all this gadgetry is going to work. Looks like it is. It's wonderful to be here and have this opportunity to talk to you as you celebrate the county's birthday. Now, the topic we're going to talk about today, and I'll run for about 45 minutes with the topic, is the history of the Mason-Dixon Line. And you know, as we talk about the Mason-Dixon Line, it's something I find awfully fascinating because it means a lot to the history of the state of Maryland and Pennsylvania. And I like to get out in the countryside and once in a while take photographs and stuff, but you know, it's like really be talking about two types of history as I amble along the countryside in Carroll County or Frederick or Hartford or down all the way down the Delmarva Peninsula down to a little place called Delmar. Because the story takes two very radically different tracks as it moves along. And I do love to get up into the countryside that was up outside of Gettysburg and amble around. One time when I was ambling around, I was up north, just north of Town in some rural road, because you never know what you're going to run into on the Mason-Dixon Line as you're looking for old photographs and pictures to support your talk. And there was a casket alongside the road, a wooden casket, and a man was selling it. It was a rainy day. Does anybody recognize what I'm talking about? Has anybody seen that? It surely can't be the only time it was there. It was somewhere north of Town. It wasn't on the main road. And I wanted to take a picture, but it was raining. It was a stormy summer day. I was out here for a talk for the the Genealogical Society. And I can't figure out where I went. So if anybody knows when I get off here, it would be a really nice thing. You're right there on the state line selling those as you amble around. And of course, that's one of the beautiful things about our countryside, that there are plenty of places to look at and enjoy the past. And it's something I like to do because it generates a curiosity about the built environment. And here in this part of our fine state, we've got such wonderful things to look at. But we want to do a little more of the history rather than having me do the weekend trip show. So let's begin to talk about this thing. And now this thing gets really complicated, and it gets tied up in all of the international politics of the time, the science, the legal things, and we'll kind of get it down to about 45 minutes worth of discussion and talk as we work our way through this. But remember I said, look at that map. It doesn't look like any map that we have access today. In fact, if you look at Maryland, or look over there where you would find Delaware, and what do you see? It looks like it's all part of Maryland. Well, that's part of the complexity of sorting this thing out. Where was the Maryland boundaries? And where were the boundaries for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? We'll sort that story out. It'll take us a few minutes. And then along the way, once we get it over with, you know, it's sort of like settling, you ever have a neighbor who gets in a land dispute about where the boundary stone was or where the meets and bounds were? It's kind of like that, except this one involves a lot of territory and a lot of money and a lot of complexity. But we'll get it sorted out, and then it'll take on a whole separate meeting in the second half of the story. So let me see if I can sketch this out for us just a little bit here. You see, if we go back to the earliest founding of the nation, the King of England had plenty of territory to pass out. He didn't really have to worry about the territory so well, because there was plenty of land along the Atlantic seaboard here that we could pass out. You know, where's the nearest neighbor? Back when the Calverts began to settle in Maryland, well, New England, and of course Virginia. Pennsylvania was still some 40 50 years into the future. So the king will draw up have his lawyers draw up the legal documents, you see. Now maybe the crown could have used a few more careful attorneys in drawing up the language, or maybe it was the crown's geographers that included a lot of loose terms and not well specified terms. Whatever the case, this boundary was really unclear. But you see in the 1630s, I'm going to slide over the water here. In the 1630s, it didn't really matter because there's really no one to worry about on that northern boundary or that eastern boundary that is going to cause such trouble. And look at bullet point number 2 there about the land. That part of the Bay of Delaware on the north, which lieth under the 40th parallel where New England terminates. Couple things. We're talking about the Delaware River, I think, right? Isn't that what the Crown and the lawyers intended? Well, there's no problems at first. And New England terminates somewhere in that fuzzy bit of territory. And look at those wonderful maps that get produced in the time that will eventually show Pennsylvania coming in there. And of course, Delaware claiming, Maryland claiming much of the Delaware Peninsula. Oh, thank you for doing that. Thanks. That's going to help a lot. I'm going to hit on the history and get stuff done. Now, 1630s. Let's move forward. 1650s, 1660s, 1670s, 1680s. We've got a new province coming up. And, you know, the king is ready to settle some old family debts, some loyalties, settle some more territory. And he will offer, in that decade, to William Penn, land that we think of as Pennsylvania. Now, they draw up some terms, and this thing gets really complicated, because Delaware can really make things complicated even today, for those of us over the Eastern Shore. Something about land that's going to be 12 miles north of the circle of a beautiful old town called Newcastle. And eventually, the Duke of York is going to hand over the Delaware territory to William Penn as well. You see, when William Penn got to his territory, he wasn't exactly pleased with the selection. You know, in those days, if you're going to have a prospering proprietorship, a prospering colony, you want to be on the highway, right? Just like you do today. Well, when he got there, you know, it kind of had the back part of the province, the back part of the territory, because he's not on the ocean. He's at the top of the Delaware River. And you know those Calverts down in Maryland, goodness knows what they might do. Here they are claiming all of my territory along the river, and they just might shut off access or something. Well, he lobbies the Crown, and they're going to say, all right, we'll give you the lower 3 counties of Delaware. We'll lease those to you. It's going to be a long-term, generous lease, but we'll put them under your control. And see, with that long-term lease to what they literally called the lower colonies, Penn has immediately made his first, resolved his first issue. Because you see, he now has access. That's over in Delaware City. Some of you may have been there. Fort Delaware, the state does a park there. But he's got access to the ocean. He's got access to the river. He is on the highway of the period. Well, that would seem to solve one of our problems, but not really. And you see, the other has to do with science and what we understood about surveying things. Anybody have any idea where the 40th parallel is? Well, when they got their maps out and they consulted some more royal astronomers, if you recognize that sea, there's Willie Penn. It's downtown Philadelphia. It was north of Center City, Philadelphia, north of City Hall, north of where William Penn is crowned City Hall. If you've ever been to the Temple campus, just in North Philadelphia, that's about where it was. Well, can you imagine what William Penn thought as the proprietors of Maryland began to assert their their territorial hold. That little red line there will give you some idea of what we were asserting from a Maryland perspective of the territory. And yet, as they presented both of these legal documents, and they consulted their maps from the time, certainly not these 1930, 40, 50 maps, Penn says, wait a minute, this is messed up. I got the long-term lease in Delaware. You certainly don't have Philadelphia, my city. And by the way, when I present my documents to you, that's down by Taylor's Island. It's like south of Cambridge. He says, here's what I own, all the way across the peninsula. You've got a problem. Now this is going to, there's a lot at stake with this thing. This is going to set in motion enormous political wrangling, a little bit of violence, all sorts of issues that is going to drag out to just at the edge of the revolution till the king gets tired of having two of his colonies, proprietorships fighting. Periodically, one side or the other would assert their right of ownership to the property. And Marylanders would go into Pennsylvania, Delaware, over at Lewis, and forcefully occupy an area. Sometimes they would burn buildings. One time we decided that we would stake our right. You know, how do you claim ownership? Well, possession's a big part of it. One time they sent them over to Christiana, Delaware, Maryland militia. And they tell them to set up a fort in what would be rightfully William Penn's territory. The sheriff from Newcastle came out, and there's a militia company from Maryland. That's like near the Christiana Mall, if you recognize that as you go up I-95. And he talked to the captain of the militia, and the captain says, you know, we're here to claim Maryland's territory. Okay. This is not your territory, and what are you going to do about it? Sheriff, well, he decided he'd go back to Newcastle, and they were thinking about getting up a little militia posse to do something. The winter came, and they got to drinking a little too much at the fort, and got frostbite, the fires went out, and that little militia feebly went away. This thing gets litigated, there's some violence, but it'll get litigated in the court systems. They will meet, on and on it goes as they try to settle this and placate things. They'll do things like propose compromises. Well, you're claiming the Delmarva Peninsula, I'm claiming the Delmarva Peninsula. How about if we just split the territory down the half? I mean, just call it even, and we'll each take that chunk of change. Well, that looks like it was going to work. That seemed to placate both sides. Then the problem is, one of Penn will die, and the sons take over. You know, it's like settling a neighborhood boundary dispute. One family thinks they've got it worked out, and the older family dies, and the next generation comes on. It's all this, because this is going on for like 80-some years here. It's in the courts of Britain, another time of England, another time they think they've almost got it worked out. And the reality was, Maryland probably had the stronger claim based on the legal evidentiary traces, the documents and things. I think Penn had the better lawyers. So Penn's lawyers demanded to see the original document. They thought there was an error in the document. Remember those days? There were no photocopiers. You sat there and a scribe would carefully copy it. It would be easy to make a mistake. So Penn's lawyers demanded to see the original documents. Well, it took about 11 years by the time they dug it up and figured out where that was filed. And so we've got this enormous boundaries, but it just keeps dragging on and on and on. The Penns will try that idea of sending settlers into the territory over by northeastern corner of Maryland, Rising Sun, south of Oxford, Pennsylvania, Lancaster. There's an area called the Nottingham Lots. Penn will partition that off. Set up lots of acres at a place called Calvert, or at the time it was called Brick Meeting, and it give enticements to the Pennsylvania residents to settle on that territory. Maryland retaliated. Everybody's doing the game. Colonel Cressa was offered land up between Lancaster and Philadelphia, Lancaster and York. About where Route 30 crosses over there at Wrightsville. Large chunk of land. He goes up with Marylanders, sets it up. The Lancaster sheriff wasn't very happy about that. He'll go out, Crescent will chase him off. Eventually they arrest him because he shot somebody one day, and they take a militia posse out and they arrest him. They're getting ready to try him in Philadelphia. And he was supposedly, he said to the court, "Why, this is the prettiest city in Maryland, I do believe." And, so there was all this going on. I'll tell you the other thing that just messes them up totally, tax collection. Because each side, the proprietors want to collect their taxes. And, think if you had just handed over in Nottingham lots that are in what we call today Maryland. Well, think if you had just handed over your taxes to the Pennsylvania taxman. And along comes somebody from the Calvert family. What do you mean I owe taxes to Maryland? I'm a Philadelphia. Down in southern Delaware. It's outside of Ocean City, like Worcester County, Wycomico County, between Salisbury and Ocean City. Maryland, of course, claimed the three lower counties, the counties of Delaware. And with that, the Maryland taxman went over into that area, thank you, went over into that area, now I can really drink, thanks. And got chased off the Maryland's proprietor's representative. A few weeks later, the sheriff Outen from Snow Hill will go back up there. He gets murdered while he's over there. And this is all about collecting taxes. So these are the kind of things that are going on. Eventually, Marylanders will petition for a trial and some representation, and he will be charged with manslaughter. Well, as we're working our way toward the revolution, we've let the 50s, 60s, we've had generation after generation of prior family members come into this thing, and each of them have different ideas about what's territory. An enormous amount of wealth, including Philadelphia, are here, and they begin to try to seek some kind of compromise because the king is getting a little tired of all of these going-ons. And eventually it goes before the courts, and they issue that compromise and say, look, this is the way it's going to be. Essentially, they're going to divide the territory in half, get a surveyor to go up and down the spine of the two states, the peninsula, split it off, figure out the southern border. And at first, they got their first survey. It's the line that would run from like Ocean City, Maryland. So when you see the lighthouse, as you go off from Bethany and Fenwick down that way, across there, that's not the Mason-Dixon Line. That was a regional surveyor who will attempt to make the survey. Well, they found out how hard this was because there's a whole bunch of science and technical aspects to it. And that's where we'll eventually get Mason-Dixon. We needed some of the period's best surveyors. So they'll run that, what they call the Trans-Peninsula Line, across the peninsula. Cut it in half so we can figure out where Salisbury, it's not there yet, but where those particular towns would be. We've also got that little quirky thing, that loop that we'll come back to in a minute, 12 miles around the old Newcastle. Now they would fight about everything because there's a lot at stake here. When they say 12 miles around Newcastle, do you measure the surface, the contours of the land? Or do you do it as the bird flies? Where do you measure from? The Episcopal Church in the center of town. This took a lot of litigation. It kept lawyers busy for a long time. Or the courthouse, things of that particular order. That'll give you some feel for that 1751 line across the border there. Well, they find out after they finish, there's the old lighthouse, after they finish that Trans-Peninsula Line, they need some help from the Royal Academy of Science back in England. And the Royal Academy will put them in touch with Mason-Dixon. And all at once in 1763, these interesting guys will show up here in the colonies to execute the survey work that has been keeping everybody tied up for a long time. It's going to take a couple of parts. One of them is we got to separate Delaware and Maryland. And today, if you're over in the Delmarva Peninsula and you find these old stones, and you look on the west side away from Baltimore, on the east side rather, on the Stones, you know what you see? You see a P, Pennsylvania, because that's what it was at the time. So we'll need to do a north-south line to split the three lower counties to be Delaware. And then we've got that 233-mile line that is going to stretch out into western Pennsylvania as far as they feel they can go safely. And along the way, I think we're doing this kind of work. Along the way, you know, this is hard work. Especially as they head west past Lancaster, get out toward York and Adams County and up your way, you know, they've got to clear the way. And this is an enormous crew of wagons and baggage haulers to handle all of the scientific instruments, food, cooks to cook with food, security for the way, but away they go, very carefully chaining the Mason-Dixon Line. This is right at the corner of Maryland and Delaware, in a place called Delaware. You may see it if you buzz down 13 outside of Salisbury on the state line there in Dorchester and County and Sussex County. They've built a little shelter over it. But they've got a big job ahead of them that's going to keep them busy. And you think of the scientific knowledge that's required to do this, to keep this thing active. By the way, this thing gets resurveyed several times. And except for minor adjustments along the way, it's amazing how accurate they were using the solar system to calibrate, make sure they've got the required degree of accuracy along the way as they put in those big crown stones to the ground, and they add the 1 mile markers. There's a group of reenactors that do this, and they're kind of an interesting bunch. Well, along the way they go. Eventually they get up into the northern corner of that north-south line. It's a place called Louisville, Pennsylvania. It's right there where the big loop starts to come out. But by the way, when they do the loop, they're going to create another problem. Because remember, it's a 12-mile circle. That's what you do. You leave yourself a little triangle there that doesn't quite loop. But now they're ready in April of 1765 for the western run out past Harford County. That's a place called Delta, Pennsylvania, the old State Line Museum. Out past Harford, Baltimore, Carroll, and they're making their way out to the point in August of 1765, they're getting into the neighborhood here, and you're going into Pennsylvania from on the west side of Baltimore County, heading out toward Carroll County. Well, that survey is going to continue all the way out to western Pennsylvania. Finally, it's October of 1767. They get to Ducker's Creek near Mount Morris, Pennsylvania. The problem is they're getting into hostile Indian territory. They've traveled about 233 miles. And after all that work, their Indian escorts are deciding this is not safe territory. And at that point, in October, they are going to abandon stop their mission, gone as far as they can. These are good scientists. Mason was the better scientist. He was the mathematician, the astronomer. He was the more learned. Dixon, they said, was more of a drinker. I checked on that. And these are some of the maps, because they're going to go back and publish these things. By the way, they died fairly poor. They don't die wealthy. This doesn't leave them much wealth and things. But here's a map they produced that shows the Delmarva Peninsula. They will show produce some of their work. I should make one more comment about the quality of Maryland's surveyors and legal team. You know, when the Crown ordered that the peninsula be split, they very precisely, because they weren't going to make the mistake they'd made 80-some years earlier, they very precisely spelled out the terms. And they said that southern border, it should be drawn at Cape Henlopen, Delaware. Now that's north of Lewis. If you're familiar with the area, you don't hit Delaware till you get down to below Fenwick Island. It's probably another 10 or 12 miles. Maryland's maps are this good, so they lost about 12 miles. Can you imagine? That's prime beach territory. And that kind of gets represented. You can see Delaware's kind of truncated there. That was the way it was supposed to be done. The proprietors should have got themselves some better maps to help with that. And today, you would think we have wrapped up the issue of the Mason-Dixon Line, and it would just be a historical survey, a historical oddity, the settling of some state boundaries. But now, this only creates a whole bunch of other things for different reasons. Number one, there's that wedge I talked to you about. Right between Maryland and Delaware, Pennsylvania at the moment, was that little yellow strip of land, because you can't perfectly hit a circle with a straight line. And into the 20th century, no one knew who had that particular line. It's going to rattle around to the 1920s till we get it straightened out. It was a wonderful place if you were trying to evade the law, because nobody knew who had authority and jurisdiction. You know, you held up a banker, did something, run over to the wedge. Nobody's even quite sure who enforces and who has jurisdiction. It's a great place for gambling and doing other types of things. That'll haunt us for quite a while. And then there's this issue of the boundary really was never meant to be anything other than the sorting out of territory that belonged to colonial provinces. But somehow, this thing gets totally messed up too, and it takes on a whole different set of symbolism. If I ask people, say if we had a more small group that was more conducive to a discussion, what you do, now this would be different with a historical site, but say if I'm in a school group or a public audience or even a college group, if they have any understanding for it, they'll talk about it having something to do with slavery. And so that gets to be an entirely another matter, is how in the world did it become issued with slavery? It also enters our popular culture. We're going to try to show you the video. Bugs Bunny does a little take on it in Southern Fried Chicken, a little spoof of the thing, and it become so popular. And we'll try to show that to you when we get done. But look at the cultural differences that will cause that issue to help and develop as you move along the line, and new meanings emerge, despite the fact that our geography is there, and the use of naming, and things like that. If we look at the decades before the Civil War, the line begins to represent a line of free soil states north of Maryland. You see Pennsylvania, its religious orientation, philosophical values, it's part of just the economics. You know, those rocky farm soils weren't meant to develop plantation-style economies that were conducive to slavery. For all of those reasons and a few more, in 1780, Pennsylvania will gradually use what they call gradual emancipation. Over the course of 20 years and over the course of an age-based formula, they will begin to emancipate slavery, so it's been outlawed in Pennsylvania. And yet south of the line, depending on where we are in Maryland, so if you go over to the eastern shore, and as you get down the shore into Kent County and Talbot County and Dorchester and Summit, same thing over in southern Maryland, these were slave economies, and the entire state of Maryland was a state where slavery was legal. Well, here's another problem with that thing. You know, freedom's right over the line, not too many miles from here. And if you were a slave in Maryland, in say Chestertown, Maryland, or someplace, that was beckoning for you. So this becomes a fairly frequent area for escapes, runaway slaves, for the conduction of underground railroad activities. The frequency was growing. The federal government really needed to try to sort this out. And if you think Congress, it's a modern thing that Congress has trouble making decisions, you can go back to lots of other periods, including this era when it was going to be hard to find a solution. The Mason-Dixon Line will show up in the Missouri Compromise, one of those times when we were in a conflict between Missouri and Maine, letting the two states into the Union, because they're always struggling, trying to keep a balance of power. Well, the Congress will think they've got a proposal, a compromise, and they'll say, You know, the territory that begins with the Mason-Dixon Line, very specific, it shows up, and south of there will be slave territory. That approach will only hold up so long, but I'll tell you, here's another way to take a look at this. You know, if you wanted to take a vacation in the 1850s, you'd want to pick up the equivalent of the AAA travel guide. And if you picked up the travel guide, the railroad guide, look what it says. You know, it says, and it's talking, and there's a picture of the Crownstone as you come into from Maryland from Delaware. And so as you were coming down on the old PW&B Railroad, earlier corporate version of the Pennsylvania, you would have been watching the guide as it talks about Philadelphia, Wilmington, gone down to Baltimore eventually. And there, it would give you a little description. It says, you know, this Mason-Dixon Line, it was once designed to sort out legal territories, boundaries between two states, but these days it has assumed a far greater importance and tension in our society, and it now figures in American political discussion. It involves itself with some of the most difficult and dangerous questions which agitate the public mind. So they'll go on and talk a little bit about this. On top of it, Congress tries another little thing. They passed the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act. You see the Southerners are getting a little anxious about this. Property is getting up and running away in the middle of the night, and you're losing a lot of money. In those northern states, especially places like Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, those officials up there are not very helpful in not returning. So they'll pass the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act, and it required officials, it wouldn't require a lot of things, but one of the important elements, it required officials, regardless of where they were, to return the runaway slaves or face the risk of federal charges and fines. There was another thing that goes on here, sort of the equivalent of boundary lines. This line becomes a very productive line for slave catchers, bounty hunters, whatever you want to call them. Down in Delaware, Sussex County, Delaware, there was a notorious lady in a little place, I don't know if any of you have ever seen this ferry called Concord Ferry. Her name was Patty Cannon. Now, she's an interesting lady, whole subject of another talk, but Patty recognized the value of grabbing slaves, because she could go after these runaway slaves, and she lives right there on the line, and she could capture them and then sell them back to their owners. And she was, now here's her problem, on top of doing that, she wasn't very careful about it. In fact, she said she'd rather grab a free person, because if you grab a slave, the property, there's a lot of money at stake in this. The property owners come in and looking for them, and it's more noise. So she'd grab the free slaves and sell them on the reverse underground railroad to the south. For a female committing these kind of crimes at the time is quite the story. Well, eventually she gets charged under some federal charges. The sheriff from Sussex County, Delaware goes out, he's going to arrest her. She lives right in the state line. Well, Patty, her network was good. She just scurries her along the side of the line over to the Carroll County side over in Fredericksburg, Maryland. Delaware sheriff doesn't have authority. Some later, the Caroline County, Maryland sheriff will go out. She repeats the same, scoots over to the Maryland side. Patty, the sheriff's coming from Denton, Maryland. Eventually, they figured it out. They didn't have cell phones, so communication was a little slow. They wrote letters. They said, let's all meet there at such and such a day at this time, and then we'll have both sides come. And you've got them all up and down the line. You can come up with them. This is one they talk about up in Gettysburg, Manhattan. Slave catchers go up and try to grab her. She was a free black slave, and she will create a feisty resistance. So we're at the edge of the Civil War. bet when Mason and Dixon went past Antietam Creek, yeah, essentially 100 years ago, you can bet they had no idea of the things that were going to happen. There would have been no thoughts about this, but we will slowly wobble our way to the Civil War. And with that, the Mason-Dixon Line has got this, attitude, or this association with slavery. You saw what the Pennsylvania Railroad, or the PWB Railroad travel guide had to say. Civil War's over. We're still not done with it. There's still cultural representations. The laws in Pennsylvania were different than the laws in Maryland. Pennsylvania had freed their slaves by 1800, 20 years after they passed the law. Pennsylvania had taken movement to desegregate its schools. This is Fun Brook, Pennsylvania, right over the line from Harford County. Take a look at the school. You'll see some African American kids in through there. South of the border, that was not the case. And so we will have all types of issues that work its way into the civil rights area. This is a photo, a political cartoon from the Afro-American when we got the Brown versus Board of Education decision. You can see somebody has set off an atomic bomb. Now, Pennsylvania is not totally innocent of these things, but lynching and violence and issues like that are a way of doing the criminal justice system and how we do. This is Delaware kept a whipping post that was on the books till 1972. We view them as south of the Mason-Dixon Line. In fact, there's the #1 popular postcard from Dover, Delaware in 1930. You know, when you were on a trip, you always want to mail a postcard from home, back home, right? Having a good time? Think of that when you grab going with the whipping post. Having a great time in Dover, Delaware. But that was a Delaware type of thing. And as papers like the Afro-American begin to write about it, here they are asking, what is the Mason-Dixon Line? And they're talking about, if you were to get into the article, they're talking about things like public accommodations related to whether African Americans could sit in restaurants or hotels or motels. In fact, we would have our own Rosa Parks, a couple of them here on the border. As trains would cross, Jim Crow rode the rails. As trains would cross from Maryland, or from Pennsylvania into Maryland, the conductor would make his rounds and say, African Americans to the Jim Crow car, to the back of the train, to the back of the bus. Every once in a while, somebody would resist that. A couple Howard University professors early on would litigate those cases. You can see there's the story that JC, Jim Crow cars are gone. The date is 1949. And often we would, we're still listening to music. They like to write songs about the Mason-Dixon Line and the things that we would listen to. And you could grab some old sheet music or your old phonograph and listen to I've All Bound Round the Mason-Dixon Line or something more popular and more catchy at that point. So we know about this civil rights issue that's kind of keeping us touched up on those old stones that are all over the place. And see, that's going to go all the way into the 1950s and 60s. In Maryland, you could get married instantly. In Pennsylvania, you had to wait 48 hours. In places like Cumberland and Frederick, they actually saw a little bit of a spurt. People would come into the county seat from Pennsylvania, from Pittsburgh, and they would come in here to get married. I'm from Elkton, that's why the Elkton pictures. Elkton, anybody that's of the right age knows that. I mean, we made movies, and it was the big story. And it's all about that line, because I saw a couple of folks nodding out there. Once you got across the line, you could get married instantly, and the place was full of marriage parties. And of course, we're becoming known. So people like the cars, they like the tourism thing. I'm not quite sure where that is, but it must be out this way somewhere. But the tourism thing along the line would catch on. The restaurants and stores were in the 20s and 30s. As we began to travel, we'll try to leverage the Mason-Dixon Line for some type of tourism. And as you cross out here from Maryland into Pennsylvania or Pennsylvania to Maryland in the 20s and 30s, that era, you would pause for photos, because you never like that kind of thing. And you would pause for the photos to make sure you could either buy a postcard or send the postcards back home. It was very popular. It was a popular tourist type of thing. And you would grab your roadmap that also would help you along the way. And of course, Maryland, the Free State, here's H.L. Meekin, he's toasting the end of prohibition, or at least beer in that case, a whole separate type of thing. Can we see if this audio, let's skip that one. Here is one of the last comments on this issue about civil rights and the meeting. President Kennedy came into power, and he was in the middle of the Cold War, and having quite a hot time of the Cold War, actually, and he was bothered by segregated businesses in Maryland. You see, African ambassadors from Africa would be traveling Route 40, because it's ahead of I-95. Remember, he dedicates I-95, right, 8 days, something like that, before he dies? Well, they had to travel Route 40, and people wouldn't serve them. And the Soviet Union was using this to their advantage. He goes to the Maryland Restaurant Association and says, really, you gotta stop doing this. You need to start serving African Americans and Africans. They said, we can't do that, it'll cost us business. And eventually we reach a compromise, the way politics works. They say, we'll serve African diplomats, but we won't serve the local community. Well, that causes an interesting thing. There was a very enterprising reporter from Howard University. This got his job at the Afro in Baltimore, out of graduate school just a little bit. And he says, boss, editor, I got an idea. He says, dress me up in some of those traditional African robes, and give me some business cards with some made-up African name. He says, these guys along Route 40, the restaurants and hotels, they won't know the difference. And oh, by the way, I ought to have a nice stretch limo, a chauffeur, maybe a bodyguard or two. And a high-level diplomat from Africa, they ought to have several photographers, right? They want to record the scene. So they went up and down Route 40, and they'd hit these restaurants, and the restaurants would agree to cooperate with Kennedy. You can find him writing about this, his staff. And they would serve it. And they would get, can we have your picture taken with the owner? They would take pictures. He comes back about 2 weeks later, it's just Joe, African American, and they refuse him admission. What do you mean I can't be served? You served me 2 weeks ago. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. Here's the photo. So it made a nice story. Kennedy will show up on the Mason-Dixon Line, having worked that Cold War problem related to the Mason-Dixon Line. Literally, when you cross into Delaware, at the Maryland-Delaware line, there's a Mason-Dixon marker right about there. I'd love to get a picture of it, but I don't know if you've ever seen I-95, and you have. It's like dangerous, I guess. I don't know what this have to do all of it. They'll cut the stone. It was the anniversary of the line. There's Governor Toss from Maryland meeting the governor of Delaware. There's Mason-Dixon. It was the Wilmington newspaper doing a story. It looks like we put this behind us. And maybe its memory is fading in some ways. But the survey people decided they've got to check the accuracy once more because we got newer instruments. And they went up and down the line in 75, and they were amazed at how accurate it was. But they ran into one woman down in Delaware. They discovered it wasn't off much, just a little bit. And when they told her about it, she came out with her shotgun, and she said, I don't care what that stone says. Nobody, you're not moving me into Maryland. She was very happy being a resident of Delaware. So their work will stand the test of time. And as we move quickly, isn't it amazing how quick we are moving? As we move quickly through the 21st century, the line still shows up in our history and in our communities in places like Marydale, Maryland and Delaware, places like Sylmar, Pennsylvania, Maryland, little communities out your way, Pinmar, and lots of other places. How about if we pause for a few minutes for stories? Lots of people sometimes will have stories as I do these things. If you want to share one that you recall, or somebody living on the line, or questions, and we'll take a few minutes to do that. Yes, sir?
I think it was the late 1970s. I was with the Maryland Forest Service, and they were charged with finding the stones, taking pictures, and the conditions of them on the old Mason-Dixon Line. I was assigned to Carroll County. There's 23 stones in Carroll County. And if memory serves me right, we found 21 of them. There's one on the street There was one under the street in Weinberg that we did not find.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the other one. Baltimore Road seems to me it was below the road in a 55-gallon drum with 2 snakes in the drum. I took the picture and let the other ranger take the snakes. And the one you showed,
Lineborough,
no,
near there.
of the Maryland and Pennsylvania, not a groundstone. There was one out in the field off of what's now 97
Yeah.
at Lewistown, and I believe it. I was through there the other day, and I believe it's still there, if not Locust Street or something.
Yeah. So plenty of those were out in the middle of farmers' fields today and things like
Oh,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
I can't recite them all, but Hummard Schoolhouse, Tracy's Mill, Hoffman Mill, Grave Run, Falls Road, Lewistown, Harmony,
Yeah.
and every 5 miles was a brownstone with the Pennsylvania coat of arms on their side and Maryland
Yeah.
on their side.
Well, overall, you did pretty well, because some places are missing a few more than your number.
Yeah, well, as I recall, should have been 23 and we found 21.
I don't know if you had the microphone, but tell me about, you found one under the road?
No, we didn't find, well, there's
It was there.
one in Balkman's Mill Road, a mile outside of Lineburg. And that was down in, the road had been elevated because it had been wet, I guess. There was a 55-gallon drum protected, and we pulled the lid off, and that's where we found that one and 2 snakes.
Yeah.
But,
They were probably shocked to see you and you were there, man.
so I don't know whatever happened to the project, but I do know the Maryland Forest Service located all they could, took pictures, recorded the conditions.
Yeah.
And there was another one out in the Lineburg area that was scarred because the road came by where wagon wheels hit
Stuff
it.
with it, yeah.
But I don't remember. Probably a mile east of Baltimore.
Yeah, I enjoy it because your land is so beautiful here. You know, and I don't know the area that well, but I'll go up like 15, you probably recognize the pictures better than I do. And then over toward Lineborough over in the Baltimore Carroll County side. I enjoy looking through here, looking at this. Thanks, sir. Thanks for sharing that.
Hi, I live on Hubbard Schoolhouse Road near the marker 65, which is now missing. Should be a crown marker there. However, I have...
You said it's now missing, right?
It is missing, but there is a GPS stone there. Then there's also a witness marker. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they made a mistake in that area or not. However, on Route 97 in Georgetown Road at that farm that the gentleman is speaking of behind the locust tree, according to the farmer, that marker is still there.
I thought it was the other day.
He's pretty friendly and will let you. He said he hasn't seen it in a while, but would walk back there with you.
Just to help me with my geography, is 97 the road I'm taking up toward Littlestown? That's right. So it's those pictures I have. That's,
They changed. It used to be 140, now it's 97, so there's no problem getting mixed up here.
yeah, well, I get, you know, because I just passed through. Thanks for sharing that. Often I'll get people who live on the, I've had a few people in the talk. Anybody live right on the, actually literally live right on the line? Could you tell us about it, sir? Is there anything you can add to it?
No, that's not
Okay.
what I would say. Back in the 40s and the 50s, I had an optometrist. His name was Dr. Trussell, and his hobby was going up and locating those markers.
And that's back in the 40s or 50s, did you say, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, think of that. I mean, there's a group today that are caring for these markers, and they even like to dress up as Mason, you know, they do it like a living, like the Civil War reenactors do, and things like that. Sir, did you say you live out there on the line? Did somebody say that? That went right through the farm? Yeah.
I thought the industry,
Hold it a little bit closer. There you go.
My birth certificate says Lewiston, Carroll County, Pennsylvania, which always made a lot of push-ups when you were getting passports and stuff.
Why was that? Because your post office was just over the line?
Yeah, we didn't get the mail on the other side.
And you were born in Maryland, right? South of the Mason-Dixon Line.
Yeah. But I found it was prevalent throughout,
Yeah.
other kids that lived on the line. The post offices were often different than
Wow.
the actual physical.
Yeah.
We have to have two markers, the farm stretch, and
Two markers,
two
yeah.
markers on the farm.
I've had people, and Greg, over here, somebody, or you got one in the middle of the back of this, you go ahead.
Okay, several people here have heard the story, but I just wanted to say, I grew up in a Mennonite community outside of Hagerstown, a little Mennonite village called Morgan's Mill, some of you know where that is, and I grew up on this farm, and I can remember, we used to take bike rides, and I can remember going up the road, and we would stop our bikes so that we were partly in Pennsylvania and partly in Maryland. We, as kids, we thought that was the coolest thing. We came home and told our parents about it, and it's just a memory I've always had about the Mason-Dixon Line.
It's a unique thing. Another story along those lines that I've had is, this was over by Louisville, Pennsylvania. So it's all the way up there as we're starting to loop it around Delaware. And the folks literally had a very nice home that the line intersects. So the rule is, in that case, the procedure is, where you sleep will be your official residence, Maryland or Pennsylvania. She always stayed in the Maryland. She was a Marylander, so she made sure that was their legal residences. Certain gentleman up here wants to say something. By the way, the stories are wonderful. That's what makes the history so dynamic. Thanks for sharing it.
Just a point of information, up on Route 30, there's Garrett Road. They may have changed the name of it, but Garrett Road used to run off of Route 30. It might be Warner Road now, they changed the name. But if you go in there, there's a brownstone protected by wire and fence, and I think the daughters of the American Revolution.
Good that.
But anybody going up that way to Hanover, it's worth it while to duck in there and see that.
Yeah. Did you retire? You spent a career with the Forest Service, sir?
Yeah. I'm retarded now.
Yeah.
You're correct, that is there. On Garrett Road, and it is protected.
And you said off of 30, is that what you all are saying?
Maryland 30 turns into
Oh, Maryland
94.
I think it makes sense.
What's interesting too is on Rebels Road, off of 194 between Littlestown, I guess, and Tawnytown, there is a mile marker there with the P and the M, and it's in the middle of someone's yard. The driveway is actually probably 7 or 8 feet from the mile marker, so it's interesting to say where you sleep is where. Also, mile marker number 66 is at a farm, and it's interesting because he has a huge concrete drain-looking type thing, and the marker is in there. I would assume so that he doesn't run it over with his tractor.
Because in some farm fields, they kind of got to have beers, knocked around and things like that. There was a case over in Baltimore County. This is Prohibition era discussion. You guys probably have some wonderful Prohibition stories out here too. But the sheriff from Baltimore County had gone up and made an arrest on the line. Now Maryland wasn't real aggressive in doing this thing, but the still the moonshiner was on the Maryland Pennsylvania line in Baltimore County. He went and got a surveyor. It was in Pennsylvania, so they had to throw the case out of Maryland's courts to full of quirky things like that. Anybody else? Right here, sir. Right here. He's coming with the mic so we can hear you. Oh, what happened to Patty Cannon? So the question was, what happened to Patty Cannon? And she's a really interesting story. I teach history of criminal justice. I tend to lapse into those things. You should try not to lapse into them too much. They finally arrested her 2.5 decades before the Civil War came. She takes poison or something, and dies in the Sussex County Jail, will not stand trial. They finally arrest her. And somebody gave her some poison to take. And today, though, if you want to see her skull, you ever go through Dover, Delaware? Well, do me a favor, next time you go through it, this is relevant, walk up to the reference library, I don't think they have it in the card catalog yet, and ask if you can see Patty Cannon's skull. On Halloween, they bring it out. Now, supposedly, it's their skull. And the backstory, can you imagine having this thing? It used to be years ago, they got a little fancier building now, they had a hat box. And if you asked to see Patty Cannon's skull, supposedly, the grandson of the sheriff, or the great-grandson, whatever the provenance is there, he had been passed down through the years that when because the Sussex, they got moved over to the old county, much like your old county jail was, they were building modern correction system. They had to dig up the graves, and this was Patty Cannon's skull. Well, this old guy was retiring in the 1920s or 30s, and moving somewhere, and he gave supposedly Patty Cannon's skull. They do have it. They say it's hers. So that's her backstory. What's the, maybe?
Dick's choice.
Yeah, what is the story? I don't know it.
I believe he owned many acres and would dispute as to where the actual line was.
Where the line was, yeah. Now, remember, everybody, this was hard on individuals. Those Nottingham lots, same kind of story. Penn offers them the lots. He says it's Pennsylvania's territory. And you know, the Calverts, the Cecil County officials, they're not happy about this. They're collecting their taxes and demanding. That's the way that murder over in Sussex County. So, you know, you didn't know who to report to. You'd get letters from the proprietor saying, do not pay taxes to Maryland, or the same thing with the Colonel going up by Wrightsville, stuff like that. So yeah, it would have been very confusing for people in that time till they sorted this out. Alrighty, thanks everybody. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. You have a very strong institution out here. It's always good to see you.